God is interested. It's not what in our society today, what's happening in our society today. It is from the top down, and people are looked at as groups. Notice that lately? How people are looked upon either by race or by whether you're male or female, okay, or your group of people. You're this group or that group. And people are looked at as groups. But that's not how God looks at us. He looks at people. You see, people have to God, as He looks upon our lives, that individuals have value. It's not a matter of group. It's also was true in the Old Testament, particularly the Old Testament scriptures, where God says, okay, how do you deal with your sin in your life? We come to the Ezekiel, and it says, you're never going to do this anymore. You're not going to use this old proverb anymore. The old proverb is that the children's teeth are set on edge because the fathers have eaten sour grapes. He said, you're not going to use that proverb anymore. Everybody's going to stand for their own sin individually. Everyone has to deal with God's in relationship to God individually. When we come to the New Testament, we find Jesus. And what does Jesus say? He uses a parable. In chapter 15 of the Gospel of Luke, we have at least 3 that has to do with lostness, right? You got the lost sheep, you got the lost coin, and this son that's prodigal, he goes away, the lost son. But you notice in each case, particularly the passage that the parable that Jesus uses as the shepherd or the sheep that has gone astray. And what Jesus says about that shepherd. The shepherd leaves the 99 and goes after the one. The individual. How people are important to God. Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount said this, that the hairs of your head are numbered. Every time you comb your hair, God has to take a new count, maybe. Point is I think it's very interesting in that sense, that it's not so much that he has a number on each one of your hairs. Okay, he knows that number of that particular hair. So, you're combing your hair and a hair is in your comb, that could be number 25 to God. You know what I'm saying? He knows us that well. He says, you are more important than birds of the air or the flower in the field, the lilies. You are more valuable to God as an individual. God doesn't look at us in the terms of group think. Group, you're the group. You're part of this group. It's like the man who comes down those steps and sees Jesus. He sits at the table. You sit at the table. It's individual. But because we're being changed by God and we're looked upon as valuable by God as individuals, you see, collectively, when you're being changed and I'm being changed in that relationship, individually, collectively, together, what's being seen? Jesus said that men would know that you're my disciples if you have love for one another. The evidence of God at work in your heart and my heart, collectively together, how we love one another and our relationships with each other, demonstrates the presence of God. to those that don't know God. You are valuable as an individual to God. You are worth it. You are worthy. You are worth it. The cost of Jesus coming and dying on the cross. You are worth that to God. You know that? I think sometimes we forget that. And at what length that Jesus would go to in order to make sure that an individual will not only know that they're loved, but the extent that Jesus would take that puts him in positions that he could even lose his own integrity or whatever by people calling him names. Remember? Jesus goes by the seat of customs. And there's a guy named Levi. Levi, he's Matthew, right? And Jesus says to Matthew, "Come, follow me." And Matthew gets up, he walks, and he follows Jesus. And the first thing that Levi does is he get his old buddies together. And he's going to have a party at his house. And guess who's going to be there? Jesus. All those other publicans and sinners and everybody, the people that Levi hung around with. And Jesus is going to be there. And because Jesus did that, he risked his own reputation as who he is. And in fact, because of that, the question was, well, how come you're doing that? And they talked to his disciples. Said, well, why is he hanging out with publicans and sinners? He says, I'm going to those that need a doctor. If you're sick, you go to a doctor. I'm not calling the righteous, I'm calling the sinners. That's why I'm here. And because of that, they began to call him a wine bibber and a drunkard because of who he associated with. The individual is important to God. You are valuable as an individual, so much so like Levi. I want to introduce you today to two people from the Gospel of John, chapter 4 and also chapter 5. First one is a woman. We only know her as the Samaritan woman. This woman had not a real good reputation in the town of Samaria. But what we have in the scripture there, we have a phrase. In chapter 4, it says that Jesus must needs, that's King James, must needs go to Samaria. That he had to go to Samaria. Well, wait a minute. If you're going to Jerusalem and you're going to go possibly to worship at the temple, you don't go through Samaria. Samaritans were considered not real cool people. Half-breeds, if you will. Because they came out of the time of the Syrians came over and they transplanted people. They came to that area where Samaria is. They transplanted. They took some people out of there and they brought some other people in there. That's where the Samaritans come from. So they figured the God of the land, the lions were starting to attack them. So they figured, we need to learn how to worship the God of the land. And so what the king of Assyria did is he found a Levite to go back to Samaria and teach the people how to worship Jehovah God. There's the Samaritans. So consequently, there's a break between Jews and the Samaritans. They don't hang out. They don't like it. You don't go through that country. You stay because they're unclean. But the scripture says, John 4, it says, Jesus had to go to Samaria. He had to go. He goes through there. And what we find as Jesus goes, he stood on the edge of a well, and he sees in the middle of the day this woman coming down the hill, coming to the well. And Jesus he says, "Give me a drink." She says, "Well, wait a minute. What are you talking about here? Are you don't even have a cup to get water out of the well. I mean, what is it? You're talking to me? What's this?" And Jesus says, "If you knew who asked you, you would ask of me. You would ask of me, and I would give you living water." That's what Jesus said. Now, there's a big discussion there. It goes back and forth. Now, that reminds you, this woman does not have a good reputation in Samaria. In fact, if she had a good one, she'd be out with the other women earlier in the day coming to the well. Interestingly enough, Jesus goes, "Well, go call your husbands, and we'll talk." And the woman says, "I don't have a husband." Now, Jesus doesn't condemn her. He compliments her in a sense. He says, "You're right. You're right." He says, "You've had 5, and the guy you're with now isn't even your husband." Of course, he didn't probably say that in the tone I just did. He doesn't condemn her. But that was part of the idea that he knew everything about her, right? Remind you, I have to go to Samaria. Jesus had to go there. Why? That woman. To talk with that woman. That's why he had to go. So the woman goes, "I perceive you're a prophet. You must know stuff, Yeah. Then she goes off on the rabbit trail a little bit more because she gets very close to, Jesus gets real close to home with her. Because here's the reality of her life at that particular time. She had 5 husbands, and the one she's with, the only identity that she really had was being with those guys. If I'm in a relationship with those guys, I'm all right. And she's searching, she's looking, one relationship after another. And she's not finding it. And when Jesus starts to get close to home, she gets theological with him. He says, oh, you say we worship here, and the Jews say we worship the temple, and, back and back. Jesus says there's going to come a time. There's going to come a time, and now is, that you will say, not on this mountain or here, but that the true worshipers who worship the Father in spirit and truth. And then the woman says, this is awesome. She says, well, when Messiah shows up, when he gets here, called to Christ, he'll straighten all this out. And here it is. Jesus goes, I'm the guy. It's me. Can you imagine at that moment what this woman is going through her head? I'm him. I'm Messiah. And she just said, well, Messiah shows up, she'll straighten everything out. I'm him. And by that statement alone, she ends up leaving her pot, going up the hill to the Samaria, and began to say, well, hey, there's this guy. He told me everything I've ever done. Isn't this the Messiah? Isn't that the one? And because of that testimony, they started to stream out of Samaria to come down to see Jesus. The individual. That's where I'm going. The value of the individual. Jesus took along, and he had to go to Samaria. He had to go to Samaria for that woman. For that woman to realize that he is who he said he was, the Messiah who has come. And that out of that, her testimony in the town began to change the town. Because they streamed out of there. The conclusion of that section is, well, we came out on the basis of the testimony of the woman, but now we've seen with our own eyes. We know that he's the Son of God. Important. The second person I wanted, it's in chapter 5 of the Gospel of John. And this is a man, it's a man who has been for 38 years lying next to a pool because he's paralyzed. The pool is called Bethesda. He has been in that position for 38 years. We don't know if he appears there, whether his friends bring him out every day and he goes home, or whether he's actually been there for a long time, not going anywhere. And Jesus on that day, it's the Sabbath day, and he goes to this place. There's a whole lot of sick people around there because it's around that pool. They believe that that pool, when the water is stirred, that the first one into the water get better, right? But out of all those sick people, Jesus goes to that one guy, that one individual guy around the pool. And the first words out of Jesus' mouth is, "Son, do you want to get better?" Now, that's kind of odd, right? You would think that would be obvious that he wanted to get better. So, what did he end up doing? He started to complain about the system and how this all works. And he goes, well, I don't have somebody to get me when the water's stirred. I don't have somebody to get me to the water. I tried to drag myself to the water, but somebody else gets in front of me. The system's rigged. Doesn't work for me. And at that, Jesus says, get up, take up your bed, your pallet, and walk. And the guy gets up and he walks. Some religious people says to the man, "What are you carrying your pallet for? Why are you carrying your bed? Don't you know it's the Sabbath?" And the man said, "Well, the guy who healed me told me to do it. That's why I'm doing it." "Well, who's the guy?" He said, "I don't know. I don't even know his name." Later, the man goes to the temple to worship, and Jesus sees him in the temple. In that moment, he knows he's Jesus. And Jesus says to him concerning that situation, he says, "Okay, you're well, right? You're better. Quit sinning, or else something worse is going to happen to you." Apparently, in his case, it was a reason why he was paralyzed, because something he did, apparently, in his life. So the man finds out it's Jesus, and he goes and he tells the guys that were questioning him about carrying this thing, right? It's Jesus. So they go after Jesus and start asking questions. Well, how come you do this? Don't you know it's the Sabbath? Why'd you do that? And Jesus says, I work and my Father works until this time. I only do what I see my Father do. Now, what does that say about God in that individual there by the pool? Why didn't Jesus just walk around and get everybody? Heal everybody. Tell everybody to get up and take up the mat. Why didn't he do that? You thought about that? Jesus says what God the Father was doing, what he saw his Father doing that day, that moment, was healing that guy. That individual was the most important at that moment to God the Father. And that guy needed to know. You see, when he's healed, he goes to the temple. In 38 years would be the first time that he's gone back to worship in the temple. Because if you're crippled, if you had a problem, you could not worship. You weren't allowed to worship at the temple. But in 38 years, this man is healed. He's walking. And in 38 years, for the first time, he's able to go and worship at the temple. And that's where Jesus finds him. The importance to God of the individual, we're important to God. And the proof that we're important to God is Jesus came. Good grief. Jesus says, or the Apostle Paul, and speaking of that scarcely for a righteous man would one die, but for us, in while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. He's not saying in terms of everybody. In that case, he's being very specific. For you. For me. Somebody once said, if you're the only person upon this planet, Jesus still would have come. Jesus still would have come. My dad would carry he for years carried around a thing in his wallet. I'm going to read it. But he also got so good at it that he could quote this thing, right? And I haven't asked him lately whether he could still do that. But it's I'd say poetry, as to say. I don't know whether he can still quote it, but I want to read it to you. It's called Touch of the Master's Hand. "'Twas battered and scarred, and the auctioneer thought it scarcely worth his while to waste much time on the old violin, but he held it up with a smile. What do I bid, good folks?" he cried. "Who'll start the bidding for me? $1? $1? Then $2? Only $2? $2, and who'll make it $3? $3 once, $3 twice, going, gone," said he. But no, from the room far back, a gray-haired man came forward and picked up the bow. He wiped the dust off the old violin, and he tightened the loosened strings, and he played a melody pure and sweet the caroling angel sings. The music ceased, and the auctioneer, with a voice so quiet and low, "What am I bid for that old violin?" And then he held it up with the bow. $1,000? Who'll make it two? 2,000, and who'll make it three? 3,000 once, 3,000 twice, 3,000 going and gone, said he. And the people cheered, and some of them cried. We do not quite understand what changed its worth. Swift came the reply, the touch of the master's hand. And many a man with life out of tune and battered and scarred with sin is auctioned cheap to the thoughtless crowd, much like the old violin. A mess of pottage, a glass of wine, a game, and he travels on. He is going once, he is going twice, he is going and almost gone. But the master comes, and the foolish crowd could never quite understand the worth of a soul and the change that is wrought by the touch of the master's hand. You're worth it. You have value to God. And like the woman, even if you try to be in relationship after relationship after relationship, trying to find who you are and calling that identity your identity. Maybe today you're struggling with your health. And I think I've used this before. I'm going to conclude with this. There was a pastor that was visiting with a woman in his church who was going through cancer treatment. He wanted to check and see how the treatment was going and so forth. Quizzed her, said, how you doing? How you doing? She says this. She says, I've got cancer. But cancer doesn't define who I am. Jesus defines who I am. Sometimes we take our identity from our health and we say, that's who I am. I find that more often the older we get, that seems like we go down that path. I can't do nothing. I can't do this. I can't do that. And on and on. But the reality is that even in those times, we're not defined by that. That's not who we are. And that's not who we are from God's viewpoint on our lives. And God comes along, the touch of the master's hand in our life. And his touch along changes us inside. And there's a lot of people that won't get it. What's happened? And it's Jesus himself that defines who we are. Not what we have. It's not what we own. Not our possessions. Not the bank account. Nothing. But here's the reality here. All that stuff's going away. Everything that we say is ours, whether it be physical health or relationships or the bank account or the car or the house, or eventually it's all going away. And if it does go away, what do you got left? If that's in those things, that thing that you're saying, that's who I am, what do you got left? My prayer is Jesus, right? Yes, for me. Even if all those stuff goes away, Jesus never goes away. He doesn't. And that relationship with Jesus is not just good for this life, but for the life to come. Let's pray together.